So for those of you that don't know me or that I haven't met, I'm Gianine Campbell. You've probably seen my face or heard my voice at various webinars over the last few years with Claris. But I head up our community relations team. I work really closely with Rosemary and really closely with Andrew Lacates, who I know is kind of the OG to many of you and to us as well. But I'm thrilled to take some time to be with you all today. We've obviously had some big things happen in the last couple of weeks, and last week with the release and launch of the Problem Solvers Circle program, which is now out in the world and creating quite a bit of excitement among many of you and your customers, and I can share some updates on that. I don't really have anything formal to present to all of you. Just wanted to kind of give you the latest updates and some expanded eligibility information related to the program that was launched last week, and then see if I can answer any questions or point you to resources if you need any further guidance. Or if you just have any general feedback for us, we'll be happy to take that too. So I won't take up too much time because I know Chris has a great presentation that you're all probably much more excited to see and hear about, which is totally fine. But thank you again for the time for the front half of your gathering today. And I will say it's awesome how international this meeting is. In the pre-pandemic world, I guess this is one of the shining lights. You know, it's hard to get people from all over the world in a room physically without that being a bit of effort on people's part. So it's pretty cool to be in a room with people from all around the world right now. So I'm in New Jersey, so not all that exotic where I am, but nonetheless, here I am. So you I think are all aware, and many of you have probably participated in the webinar that was featuring Brad and Peter a couple weeks ago, and then last Tuesday, May 3rd, we officially launched this new program called the Problem Solver Circle, which is an opportunity for customers to really take full advantage of the entire Claris line of products and the platform as a whole, with kind of minimal risk and cost, for a 2-year period. So the general the fundamentals of that program have not changed. The program is designed to allow customers to renew at a slight premium over what their renewal would have been, to get on a 2-year site license agreement that gives them access to the entire Claris platform. There are 2 flavors of it. One is the on-premise flavor, one is the cloud flavor, and the premium you pay is slightly different between the 2. But the real benefit of the program is the access and removal of barriers from a licensing perspective to the entire product line. So for those customers who have wanted to expand and try to get more usage, but for whatever reason couldn't, or it wasn't feasible financially, this program is a really good fit for those accounts where, maybe they have 100 employees, but they only have about 10 users, and this would give them access for all of their employees to every product we offer for a 2-year period. And for our partners and developers working in those accounts, that green space to explore and to do more and solve more problems just became that much more accessible. So that program is now out, and there's been a great deal of interest. We have hundreds of customers lined up to learn more about it, and so we're encouraging all of you to learn more about it and share it with your friends, colleagues, customers, whoever you feel needs to learn more. There are a lot of resources on claris.com, and we can put some links in the chat to help you all. But there has been an update just given the number of people that we're seeing really want to get into this program, and we're really focused on trying to make it available to as many people as we can, given that it is a limited availability program. So we've expanded the eligibility. It was originally set for existing customers who are on a current contract. And we're noticing that it's great for them, but there are also some customers who have been on expired contracts who are interested and want to learn more. So we've actually just opened up eligibility for those customers as well. For what it means for all of you really is, if you have a customer who is interested in this, regardless of their contract status, have the conversation. If you need help figuring out, is this a good fit? Is this customer eligible? How do I make this work? Just reach out to either your Claris sales or your partner manager if you're a partner, and we would be happy to just link arms with you and talk through any customer that you think is a good fit or is expressing interest and you're just not sure if it's the right play or if they're eligible. Just reach out to us. But we have expanded eligibility. We heard some feedback from some of you about, hey, what about our expired accounts? This might be a great way to bring them back in. And we really don't want anyone to not have the chance to explore this really great opportunity. So we're pretty excited about it. Like I said, it's limited to the first 500 customers, and we have many who are expressing interest. So, but that said, please make sure that you're talking about it. And if you have questions, I'm here to answer those questions. So that's really all I have. And I'm happy to sit quietly and listen for a little bit. Thanks, Rosemary. I saw you put the link to the webinar from a couple weeks ago in there. And Eric, thanks for putting the Problem Solver Circle link as well in the chat, so you can connect to those things. There's also a discussion on community. So if you have questions after today, you can always pop into that discussion and ask, and our team is ready to answer. You can reach out to me, you can reach out to Rosemary. Like I said, we're here to help. But we're pretty excited about this because I know from my time in sales, I always hated when, I can't justify the licensing was the reason that my customers couldn't do more with Claris. And this really does give that freedom to explore for a 2-year period and really maximize the value that Claris can bring to an account, to a customer, to a business. So yeah, we're pretty excited about it. Okay, so here's a question. Pricing is not 30% if they have prepaid for multiple years. So Stephen, there's a pretty scientific calculation that goes into the premium, and our system would generate those quotes. So if anything looks off about a quote, certainly raise it with our team. Sales will inspect it, but it's 30% premium over what your renewal would have been for 2 years for on-prem, and 2 times what you would pay for cloud. So whatever a 2-year renewal would have been for your current license configuration, it's 30% or 2x, depending on on-prem or cloud. So if anything's not looking right, just reach back to our team and we'll check the calculation. But it's not 130%. I can guarantee that, or it shouldn't be. So, any other questions or comments, feedback?
Yeah, I mean, it is, oh, we're being recorded. If the client has already paid 2.5 years, that is what we got, was 130%. Because they had to pay the 2-year renewal plus the 30%.
So it was for a customer that had more than 2 years remaining?
No, they had 2.5. they had already paid 2.5 years. Yeah.
But do you know, well, so it's, I would say, you know, let's look at it more closely. Let's get the, have you talked to sales about it? We should just sync on that one and try to make sense of it, because it doesn't sound right.
Yeah. So it's if they've
you know-
already paid. Yeah. And so it's really, I think the original slide said you weren't more than 2 years out, but it still makes sense for some clients, I think, even if you have paid 2 or 2.5 years already, just not for ours.
Yeah, it really, because to Chris's point, I see his comment in the chat. We are, if there, depending on how much time is remaining on the contract, you know, that contract is going to be replaced by a new contract. So we do look at that balance and sort of do some calculation to kind of offset. So it probably has a lot to do, the scenario you're talking about probably has a lot to do with whatever was remaining on that contract. But if you want me to, if you want to just reach out to me and want me to get one of our sales managers involved, I'm happy to do that. We can work through it together.
Yeah, we've talked to Tyler, but I just wanted to clarify that. If you have it, I mean, ours was specifically because they had paid a full 2.5 years, whereas, you know, if it was just 2 years they had already paid, there's the ability to stretch that contract 6 months later. And so, you know, you do get some kind of proration there. And so it's not 130% in that case. It's just, you know, we've encouraged people to buy multi-year, and so that's where they are.
Yep.
Well, I have a question. So wasn't it that there'll be a single user version available for developers to work on all of these new products?
Yes, thank you.
When will that happen?
Yeah, so I forgot to mention this. So in addition to the products in that everyone's familiar with, Claris FileMaker, no, it's going to be Claris Pro, and Claris Connect, there is a developer preview of Claris Studio, which is the sort of next iteration of the product. So that is also something that those who are in the program get access to, and Claris Studio is available. It's out now. So it's been released as of last week. So anyone who's in the program gets all of the Claris products, including access to the developer release of Claris Studio.
You have to be in the Problem Solver Circle to get the single user preview?
Correct.
Are you specifically asking about our longer term plans that Peter talked about in the update webinar, where in the fall we will be releasing a freemium version of the entire Claris platform?
I probably, that for a single user you could use it, learn with it, try it, whatever, and then if you wanted to upgrade to multi-user, you could, I guess. But developers could use that to learn the platform.
Yeah, so I think that's the freemium version. Rosemary, you heard him better than I did. So that's later. That's different than the Claris Studio developer preview.
Yeah, that will be coming in the fall. We haven't announced a specific exact time frame for it yet, but later this year.
Okay, thank you for that.
Are there any other questions?
Oh, I see Stephen's question about version 20 of Claris Pro. So yes, so Claris Pro is what will become FileMaker, and we've released as part of the developer preview the first release of Claris Pro. And it is exactly the same as the current version of FileMaker Pro, except that it can also consume data from Claris Studio. That is the only difference between the developer preview of Claris Pro and the current version of FileMaker Pro. Does that answer your question, Stephen?
Yes, thank you.
I'll hang out for a little bit longer and just listen, but I don't want to cut into too much of Chris's presentation. So
Yeah, feel free to continue to ask questions in the chat and as we proceed.
Yep.
Thank you, Janine.
Well, looks like Chris will be starting almost right on time then.
Right. Let me know if you guys can all see my screen.
I can.
Perfectly.
Okay, awesome. Shall we get started?
Let's go ahead.
All right, let's do it. So, ever since the demos, I guess last fall of Magnolia, and the announcement that that was going to be, what is now Claris Studio is going to be back-ended by MongoDB, I wanted to look into Mongo because I'd heard of it, but I didn't know much about it. And there's a lot of interesting aspects about MongoDB that get into some of the things that we've wanted for the FileMaker platform for a long time. So I wanted to touch base on those. And I don't want to sort of pre-announce the slides here, but I wanted to get into it and just sort of look at what it was, because I think there are a ton of significant implications to this. And for those of you who haven't looked into Mongo, some of this stuff may be news to you. So let's move on. So, the big thing that I think everybody here has probably seen the Claris Studio demo is that, FileMaker 20 has the ESS connectivity with MongoDB. So you can actually talk to it just like you would, MySQL or SQL Server or what have you. When I started looking into Mongo, I found this tool, the third bullet point here, called the Mongo BI connector. So Mongo is a document database, which is different from a relational database, and we'll get into some of the differences in a minute here. But, they were smart enough to realize that you have the likes of Tableau out there and reporting tools and stuff like that, have been around for decades even, and are made to talk to ODBC databases. And so they actually created an interface that takes, what is basically a JSON formatted table structure and created an abstraction layer so that it could be understood by an ODBC driver. And when I looked at the Mongo BI connector ODBC driver, it was actually a fork of the MySQL ODBC driver. And I thought, that's weird. And it was an old fork too. It was from a couple versions ago. So I thought, I wonder if the current version, 8, I think, is the current ODBC driver for MySQL. And I was interested to see if I could actually talk to Mongo with that version. And it turns out you can. So you can actually talk to Mongo now with a MySQL driver if you stand up this Mongo BI connector, which I thought was kind of interesting. And so, Claris Studio is, intentionally a very limited feature set thing. They wanted to sort of, put the infrastructure in place and figure out a bunch of things. But there are sort of long-term implications to this, and like, what could we possibly do with this? And what are some of the new paradigms that might be 2 or 3 or 4 versions out? And, ordinarily you'd have to wait for that to roll down or get in the ETS and, hope that version comes to you. But I thought, if we could start working with Mongo now and just sort of, see what the possibilities are, that's worth doing. And so I'm here to advocate that you start kicking the tires on this, because it does a bunch of fun stuff. And as I touch on here in the last bullet, it has a bunch of capabilities that FileMaker doesn't have yet, And so what are those capabilities? So one is we have horizontal scaling. High availability is something I think everybody has wanted in FileMaker for several years now, since we knew that was a thing. And so if you have a server go down, wouldn't it be great to have a cluster of servers? And they were all identical, and they could load balance among them. And if one of them went south, the others would sort of, pick up the slack and take care of all the clients. And so this idea of being maybe not impervious, but certainly durable against a hardware failure or a server failure or a network outage on something, when you could have replicas of the server running in different data centers all over the world, that would be awesome. And so Mongo just has this native built into it. And sort of the default cluster configuration is what's called a replica set. And that is, why I gave the photo that they asked for at the beginning, where a bunch of replica Chris's are standing around. So I am impersonating a replica set there. Sort of similar to that, but different, is this idea of sharding. And so if you had a table that had, say, I don't know, rental information, suppose you're Airbnb, and you have people who want to, reserve rooms in the EU versus North America versus Asia or something like that. They might all live in the same table, but the likelihood of them being used in specific geographic areas is high. And so you might have your US listings in a US data center and an EU data center for the EU listings, and so on and so forth. This concept of sort of splitting a table across multiple data centers or servers is called sharding. And so that's different from a replica set where you have identical copies of the database on the different servers. And so this is sort of a high performance capability. And, that would have been a cool thing to be able to do with FileMaker, even now or years ago. And so the fact that these kinds of high availability and high performance capabilities are available made me want to start thinking about, if I wanted to have, or if I had a need, or if a customer had a need to, say, share their FileMaker data at the edge of the system. They might have a FileMaker database that they actually run their business on, but they're all as customers of the customer, and they might want to know the status of a project, or has an order been paid, or anything like that. And so where they need to share at the edge and have a bunch of anonymous users, this is tailor-made for those sorts of scenarios. And so sharing data at the edge with anonymous users has not been straightforward in the past. And so I think this shows real promise for those sorts of use cases. The automatic failover is something I alluded to already. And something that I don't know what I would do with it maybe, but Mongo is really good at time-based data. So if you have like server logs or, stock market tickers or something like that, IoT device stuff, this does a great job of processing like high volume time-based stuff like that. So if you ever wanted to do log analysis or something like that, or write, a security incident event manager to sort of ingest logs on a constant basis, you could actually write something like that. And FileMaker would be terrible at that kind of thing. If you're trying to pull in gigabits of or gigabytes of logs, not a sweet spot for FileMaker, but it is for Mongo. And so some of these things that we would have never considered as good fits for FileMaker in the past suddenly become doable. And so that's interesting to me. And it sort of expands the sort of good set of use cases that we could address with the platform. So interesting. This is just a quick illustration. Here's the difference of sharding, where we actually split a table. Suppose we start with a 1 terabyte table, and then we break it up into 4 pieces, and we put a different piece on a different server. So you could actually have your database partially go down. Suppose we lost server A, all the other shards would still be up and running. So this idea of partial failure is interesting and certainly not possible with FileMaker. And then contrast that with a replica set where you have a complete copy of the database, and you have a primary one that can act as a load balancer. And then you can get this failover thing. So if your primary falls down, the secondaries will sort of converse amongst themselves and say, okay, who's got the freshest data? And, would be easiest to sort of make the primary again. They sort of figure it out amongst themselves, and they automatically elect, okay, you're going to be the primary now, go. And it just happens automatically. And that kind of sort of server self-management is mind-boggling to me. And how awesome would that be to, not have to worry about stuff like that? So just real quick on how clusters work. I mean, you can take a default cluster and it'll, its default state is a replica set, but you can actually write a little configuration file to say, you know what, I want to split these into shards, and, I want them divided up by country or by ID range or whatever it is. You can write your own rules to say, here's how I want these divided into shards. And, these are the pieces of it. So you have something called MongoS, which acts as a router to say, okay, I have a query coming in, where should I send it? You have a configuration server, which is actually a little Mongo instance itself running, and then you have the different shards. And so the MongoS it preloads the configuration and then routes intelligently as stuff comes in. And so it's smart routing to where the data lives. And, all of this has the effect of, on any one server, the load is greatly reduced, because if you ever get high volumes, all you have to do is just start expanding, either vertically with multiple shards or horizontally with multiple replica servers. And so it's really easy to take a surge. A couple of weeks ago, Molly Connolly was on, I think, FM Disk. I forget who she was talking to, but she gave an example of the Chicago public schools, and they have magnet schools that people sign up for. And at a specific point in time at 5:30 on a Friday, like 4,000 or 5,000 people hit the server and say, "Did my kid get in?" So they have to have the ability to very quickly scale up to a high load, and then it scales down to nothing, in a matter of days. And so this kind of flexibility to have high scalability and then flex up and down is, again, something that would be nice to have in FileMaker, but this all of a sudden gives us the ability to address cases like this. So as far as comparing Mongo to FileMaker, one thing that, I appreciate about both of these databases is that, you can build a system, deploy the system, and then change your mind as you go and say, you know what, I'm going to need some more fields or more tables or tweak some relationships. Mongo doesn't have relationships, but this idea of flexibility post-deployment is inherent in both systems. You can have them be running on servers on-prem or deployed in the cloud. They both can talk to ODBC clients. So if you have specialized reporting needs or visualization or something like that, that works fine. And the security setup is a little different, but similar. So you won't find yourself completely in a foreign land if you're looking at setting up security in Mongo. And then the other thing that sort of struck me as I kind of dug into Mongo a whole bunch is that it is not a relational database system. It's a NoSQL system, and there are different variants of NoSQL that I'll touch on in a second. But it doesn't use like regular, you specify a table, you specify the fields in that table, and that's it. Every record shares that. Mongo is completely different in that the schema lives at the record level. So one record might have, 10 data points, and another record might have 15 or 20 or 5. And so the schema actually lives in the record itself, which is kind of a shift mentally that, we should probably start thinking about if we're thinking about, what sort of strategic use cases do I want to address down the road here. So that is a significant difference from what we're used to. And the relational model has been around for 30 years, but, starting back around the end of the 2000s, as, big high scale applications hit the internet, they found they outstripped the ability of relational databases to handle that kind of volume. And I'll get into some of the whys and wherefores in a couple of slides here. But interestingly, 30% of all Mongo projects are migrations from relational database systems that can no longer handle the load. So this is made for high scale deployments. And another interesting thing is that because this is such a common thing where someone moves off a relational system to a NoSQL system, that there's a whole ecosystem of tools that can do this for you in a variety of ways. It can be like a one-off migration, or it can, sort of create a bridge between the two systems, and it'd be a real-time link where if you change data either in the NoSQL system or in the relational system, it will get propagated to the other side. And so It's really nice that these tools are already in existence and we don't have to sort of reinvent the wheel there. Regarding the flavors of NoSQL, so sort of the I think one of the earliest types of NoSQL databases was this idea of a key value store, and this is exemplified by Dynamo or Infinity or Redis, and I think Redis is especially known for ingesting log files. Interestingly enough, the document database, which is MongoDB is an example of, is actually a variant of a key value store where you have, an ID field, and then the value can be this complex JSON object with a bunch of nested information. But technically, a document database is a key value store database. It's a flavor of, but not all key value store databases are document databases. There are column-oriented databases. You might have heard of HBase, or certainly MariaDB is fairly common. And then graph databases are a more recent thing. I think a lot of people here have probably seen examples of Neo4j. Vince, I think you've done stuff with Neo4j in the past. There's a little example of a network graph in the corner there. And so, as far as Mongo goes, we're here. So this is a document database. And the thing that really struck me about the relational model is how it has sort of curtailed our thinking in how we structure database. And I being a little melodramatic here, it's like you're a prisoner of the normalized data, but let me show you what I'm getting at here. So if you look at these records, this is a non-normalized table. We have a bunch of people, and all of them have emails. Some of them have work emails. All of them have home phones. Some of them have work or cell phones. But the sort of thing to note here is that not all these records are the same shape. It's sort of Swiss cheese. And the way we address this in a relational system is we normalize the stuff where we have the one-to-many relationship. So you could conceivably have, multiple phone numbers, multiple email addresses and stuff like that. And so we address the Swiss cheesiness of this by splitting it out into multiple tables. So we take that and turn it into something with names and phone numbers and addresses. And this works great for a relational system. However, the trade-off is that now if I need to retrieve these, and especially if I need to sort of retrieve this as a single collection, maybe you're logging into, I don't know, Facebook or what have you, Claris Community, and you want to pull up all your stats, you have to do a whole bunch of joins to put this information together and then pull it. So it creates a burden for the server to do this when you start to get into, say, millions of transactions a second. In regular use and regular FileMaker systems like we work in, not a problem at all. And even like larger Oracle systems or DB2 or something like that, not a problem for regular use. But when you start talking internet scale, where you have, millions of users hanging off of this thing, this starts to break down and not perform well. And so the solution is to change the design from, a regular relational model design to you design for what sort of data do you need to pull. So these are two records. In this case, in the parlance of the document model, these would be called documents, and they have a slightly different shape. They're in the same table, but the table has different numbers of fields depending on which document we're talking about. So the huge difference here is that schema lives at the record level. And this solves all the problems of Swiss cheese. If you have, null values in something like that, you just omit the field in that record or document, and the problem goes away. And so, all these years of us using the relational model have sort of made us think like that is the only way to structure data. And it's not true. It's not the only way to structure data. So when you start looking at NoSQL databases, you sort of need to unlearn some of the habits we've learned by normalizing tables all the time, because that's not how we do it here. Oliver is going to get into some of this stuff, but you basically structure your data according to the kind of queries you would want to make against it and make sure you can pull everything with a single query with a single ID. And then I'll just sort of leave that there, and Oliver can speak to that at more length. And so, here are the benefits of structuring data this way. Your joins are much simpler. Multiple tables can collapse into a single JSON chunk of data where you have arrays or nested documents. Schema is implemented at the row level instead of the table level. The complexity is less. So if you imagine stuff where data is sort of pooled together in these big blobs like that, you know, if you were to map this on something analogous to a relationship graph, the graph would be simpler. And so it's just less complexity to manage, not just for the server, but for the maintainer. So if you had to roll up and look at this and say, what the heck is going on here? You know, if you look at a, you know, typical complex FileMaker solution, there are hundreds of table occurrences in there and relationships, and you got to figure out what are these doing? These have utility purpose and stuff like that. The world is much simpler in a NoSQL database system. And so the end result is this thing just has raw speed. You get faster queries, you get less server load, and it is for polymorphic data, which is generally the kinds of stuff we tend to handle, you know, unlike say a log file, which is very uniform. This is the most efficient implementation. And so just that shift alone, I think, is something that's going to take time for us to sort of think through the implications of. The actual storage structure of this is a variant of JSON called bson. MongoDB invented this back in 2009. The format is widely supported outside of Mongo. C, C++, C#, JavaScript all have support for reading and writing to bson. And its sort of foremost objective, the purpose of this thing is to be storage and scan speed efficient. And so this is stored in binary, not in a text format. And so there's a little snippet in the lower right-hand corner here. Information that is useful for the server to figure out, you know, what it's going to be looking at is total document size, what type of data do I have? Here's this string or a number value. What's the value? When's the end of the object? And so it has a lot of information that makes it fast to search, just sort of embedded in it, from, you know, data types to start and end boundaries of the data point. And it also bson supports data types that you just don't get in JSON. There's a ton of numeric subtypes for all sorts of scientific applications or what have you. You get a byte array, you get a date time value. And so bson is similar to JSON, and it can, for the most part, be represented in JSON, but it is fundamentally different. And here's a quick comparison between the two. So text versus binary, optimized to be human readable and fast, but bson is faster to build and scan. Parsing is different. It's not really parsable by humans. bson isn't, but it can be represented as JSON. And it's highly optimized for fast database, you know, reading and writing. And so as far as security goes, a lot of similarities to FileMaker. You can have whitelisted connections, which are different, but you can have encryption in transit, you know, SSL/TLS, same. You can have encryption at rest. There are multiple tiers of Mongo. There's a community edition, which is free, but there's also professional and enterprise editions. And so these sort of higher order versions of Mongo do support encryption at rest. And one thing that Mongo has that's really cool is client-side field level encryption. And let me explain how that works, because that's kind of mind-boggling. So I have a little GIF here that'll sort of run through it. And basically you store a key locally. So if you want to have something like your social security number and you want to store it in the database, you have your key manager locally, the MongoDB driver will encrypt it and then send it to MongoDB. Now we have field level encryption at FileMaker, but generally the decrypting keys are either in a script or something like that, where if I'm a database administrator and I have full access to the file, I could reverse that out if I had to. That is not the case with this. Only the client can basically undo the encryption. So they can have something that's encrypted that even someone in possession of the entire MongoDB database file would not be able to decrypt. It is obscured from anyone who has possession of the file. Only the client can unlock their own record that they wrote. So that's kind of interesting and, you know, again, significantly different from FileMaker. Different types of authentication are available to us. Scram, which is salted challenge response authentication mechanism. So it's just basically glorified username and password. You cannot have any username and password at all and just have certificate authentication, where if you're in possession of the certificate, you're good to go and you get access to the database. LDAP proxy authentication, again, not available to the community version, but the higher order versions you can have. Kerberos authentication. I have a URL at the bottom here. If anyone's super interested in this, you can just go look at it and have a look. And then if you want to investigate some of the tools that are out there for migrating from a relational model to a document model, these are a few that I found: Studio 3T, Altoa MapForce, AWS has their own database migration service. So you can poke around with these. There's a bunch of others out there. Some of them are abandonware. So this sort of has the, I guess, whiff of something that was a much bigger thing several years ago. And then some of these tools just died on the vine. But there's still plenty of utilities out there to do this kind of thing. If it's your case is one where you'd want to have FileMaker running and have it be very tightly coupled to a Mongo deployment, and you wanted to keep those, the two sides of that hybrid solution in sync. Those tools exist for that, and you would not have to, build that from whole cloth. And so how might you use this idea that you can have FileMaker on one side and Mongo on another side? So you might want to just say, I have something that I need to push out to a bunch of people. And so it makes sense to sort of transition something that I prototyped in FileMaker out to a full Mongo deployment and just do sort of a one-off migration. You could have coexistence where FileMaker is kind of acting as a content manager, and you can sort of iteratively push client data out. This is the kind of use case where a client has customers who want to see a project status, or has an invoice been paid, or stuff like that. Those sorts of things where you're sharing some information. The first iteration of Claris Studio doesn't have that. They could sign up for something, but you don't have the ability to sort of load those with a payload and say, you're Fred Flintstone. You need to know that, this project has these statuses on these tasks. And, if you have any feedback or you want to change priorities, you can. So you can't have a two-way dialogue right now. It's really just a read-only situation for this first iteration of Claris Studio. But thinking ahead to cases where we might want to have it be a two-way street is interesting. And we should start thinking about those now because it's coming. I wanted to show a demo real quick just to give you an idea of what Mongo is. Eric, did you pop that list of installation resources out onto the user group, or how might people get access to those?
Yeah, it's out there in the community.
Okay, so
I'll
that
post
you
the
push
link
it to the
again.
community. So there's a list of things where you can find installers. If you're on Windows, you can do MSI. There's DMG installers. You can also install Mongo on a Mac if you want a local instance, using Homebrew if you want to. So there's a bunch of different ways to install it. There's also a cloud-based version of Mongo called Atlas, and this is available from AWS or Google or Azure. I'm pretty sure that Claris Studio is running its own sort of customized version of Atlas. And so that's a cloud-based installation. There's a free tier of Atlas that you can get from Mongo. So if I go up here, this is what it looks like. You have your different databases. I have a test database out here, and I just have database tables are called collections here. So these are just different collections that I've loaded up. And this is what these things look like. And so name value pairs, for the most part, I can have arrays, I can have embedded documents, but this is what data looks like in a MongoDB database. There is a client tool called Compass that you can just download for free from the MongoDB website. And so I have that same database here. There's a connection string here. And so I can say connect to this, and it will connect up, hopefully. Maybe not. I might have a fall down here. I'm going to push that to the background and just sort of move along. But if I wanted to run this locally, let me bring up my terminal. And so I have installed MongoDB on my local machine. If I want to fire that up, I can just say go, and it's going to think about it. And I think it's run. And so let's see if I can connect to it with Compass. Nope, I had a problem with that. Let's see if I can get to my local one. Yes, there it is. And so I have a sample database here. And so I'm actually talking to my local instance. if I wanted to, so this is fine and it's Mongo and I can use a sort of Mongo fluent client like Compass to talk to it. But if I wanted to get FileMaker to see this, I would actually have to run another tool called the MongoDB connector tool. And so the way you do this, you just download it. It looks like this when you've downloaded it. So here are the files. You would just install anything that started with Mongo, and all of a sudden these become commands that you can execute. So so I would do that and say, hey, sudo install all those Mongo tools. And so if I want to run this, I'm going to say, hey, connect to my sample namespace here, go. And it's going to start going. It's going to say, hey, I'm talking to the local host. I've got SSL running, waiting for connections. And this is the cool part to me. So it says, hey, let me take a look at sample. And in less than a second, it said, okay, I found this sample database and I found this collection called restaurants. And it has now created an abstraction layer for that is now accessible by ODBC. So it doesn't even need to know what the structure of the thing is. It'll just sort of grab it by the face on start and say, all right, what have we got here? And what do I need to cook up so that an ODBC client can talk to this? And it goes, and it happens so fast. It's just amazing. So I'm going to go into FileMaker and I'm going to say, hey, I want to open, close this. I'm going to open ODBC source. And actually, before I do that, let me just show you this. So I have Mongo local set up here, and this is what the configuration looks like. So I actually told it to not bother with SSL, but it's the local host, talk to the sample database. Notice that the port is one off from the traditional MySQL port. So MySQL is 3306. So the default for this is 3307. You could certainly use something else if you wanted to. But it's a couple name value pairs. We say, okay, we're good to go. So there's Mongo local. So then I'm going to go here and say, let's talk to Mongo local, hit continue. I'm going to give it my credentials and it sees stuff. So I could say, hey, grab some of this. I don't want to have to grab each one of these. So I'm just going to give it the wildcard and say, go. And we'll do that. Say yes, pull it in, convert. And it loaded onto my other screen, but I'll just pull it up here. And so now I have this, MongoDB table that I was just able to open in FileMaker. And if I go into the relationships graph and add a table, I could say, hey, let's talk to the ODBC source, Mongo local. Do the same thing. And I can go hit these. This is some sample data that I pulled off the Atlas website, and unfortunately, they don't have a single unique field here. So if I tried to say, hey, grab the restaurant grades and click OK, it's going to say, I need a key here to work with. But this key is not unique for some reason. I don't know why. And so FileMaker is going to bark at me and saying, I don't have uniqueness here, so I can't make this into a key. But you get the general idea that this is fairly straightforward to connect to once you set up the BI connector. So I guess my larger point here is that it's fairly straightforward for you to start experimenting with Mongo. Imagine yourself, in future iterations of Claris Studio and how you might want to use this. You don't need to wait for those new versions. You can start messing around with this right now, talking to it using ODBC, getting a free tier of Atlas, and just sort of kicking the tires on this and see what you can do with it. So let me go back to my slide deck. And the next slide I have is kind of a call to action here. And so, what I'm advocating for is that you start to have a go at this, give it a try, try out Atlas, try connecting to it with ODBC, and to sort of give you a running start at this, I want to hand it over to Oliver. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Oh, but before we switch over to Oliver, we had some questions.
Sure.
John Rosen was asking one. What was it? Are there containerized installations that you can download?
I think there are. I want to say there are Docker instances of it. A quick Google search will tell you that, but I'm almost positive I've seen those.
And I'm kind of curious, what's the like comparable size of the files? Like, if you had like a FileMaker database versus a Mongo database, are they taking up about the same space or more or less?
No, because Mongo stores everything in binary, so it's designed to be super efficient in terms of storage and retrieval. And so it's more of a tokenized version of that. It's hard to explain, but it's a binary format, not a text format. And so it's the equivalent files would be smaller in Mongo.
Oh. And then, well, needless to say, the performance is outstanding. Even with that BI connector, which seems to be doing a kind of a translation, right? It's still
It's
really
crazy how fast that is. It just stands it up and says, "Oh, I have this and this and this and this, and so I'm going to represent this as these tables." And I didn't call it out specifically, but in cases where I had an array, the address, had the street number and the street and the zip code and stuff like that, it just sort of prefixed this embedded information. So my field was address, building number, address, street, address, zip code. And so it sort of makes a decision on the fly how it's going to represent, this complicated object, on a record by record basis. And it has to scan the entire collection, because schema is different on a record by record basis. So it has to look at the entire universe of possibilities. And in a matter of seconds, it's like, okay, got it. Here we are. Go. And it just presents it to you. It's just crazy how fast that is to me. That was, it wasn't that many records. It was 25,000 records, but it took less than a second for it to figure all that out and sort of map all the potential field configurations.
So I started playing around with the Atlas site that you provided in the links, and I saw that it was creating indexes and all kinds of things. And so indexing is still an important part of
Yeah, absolutely. But you have fewer of them. So you are able to retrieve an entire blob of information with a single index field. So in FileMaker, we have tons of, you have to have tons of indexes because you're creating all these joins between tables. And so all those foreign keys have to be indexed. And when you sort of mush, basically a bunch of one-to-manys together into a single document, then your indexing needs are much less. And so again, that contributes to high performance.
Chris, great presentation. Quick questions. What are some of the things that Mongo isn't good for? Is like, for example, one question is this good for aggregating across all those record sets? Like, let's say you had a data point and you wanted to aggregate, like, or get an average of the age of a person or something like that, if that data point exists.
I would like to save that one for Oliver because he has the answer to that question.
Okay. And then, so the other thing you just mentioned, so what you're saying is it scans the whole collection of those documents and it figures out what all the possible columns should be, right?
Yeah.
And is there like situations where someone has named, like, could it happen that someone has named like one column or one attribute on a record something and called it something else in another record, so you end up with two columns that are similar?
You'd end up with two separate columns.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
When you insert a record, it'll create the schema on the fly as the record is inserted. It's like, oh, I've got 15 fields here instead of the usual 12. Off we go. And so it's great in that there are no implications to the remainder of the table. It's like you can have this sort of odd duck embedded in here and it'll just handle that. And so not having to revise your schema to accommodate an edge case is huge, because in FileMaker or in any relational database system, if you all of a sudden have a new data point that you don't have a field for, that's a problem. In Mongo, it's like, all right, I'll just whip up this field for this one record, and it's totally fine.
That's crazy.
One thing I noticed,
This
Chris,
idea of schema living in the record took me a while to like, okay, I think I got it.
I noticed with your execute SQL import, the name for each column was actually the path, the JSON path to the value in the
Yeah,
JSON.
it's sort of XPath, the little values there in the
So
array.
if ODB, if you set up an ESS table from a MongoDB collection and it labels everything that way, it makes it very easy to sort of construct JSON strings out of it to use with APIs and so on
Yeah,
the FileMaker
absolutely.
side. I actually wrote some custom functions to do precisely that, convert a JSON object into a list of the full path and the value, just to help to make it easier to analyze and do stuff with them. But that looks like it does it on the fly, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's the other aspect to this that, Todd Geist was sort of early to the party with, JSON functions and JavaScript and stuff like that. And, it's not exactly theory follows practice, but the future of the product could be guided by some of the stuff we think up. If we sort of run on ahead of the engineering team and say, okay, what are the useful paradigms here and what are the really good use cases? That's useful information for product management and the engineering team to say, oh, this is really handy for the FileMaker community. We should probably steer the ship to address that well. And so if we figure out some of this stuff ahead of time, I think that'll just benefit the platform.
That's a good thought. Also, by the way, those document IDs are supposed to be unique. That's the key thing about them. So
I don't know what's going on. It's a sample thing, but yeah.
So I mean, that's the whole point.
Some things are
A
right.
lot of stuff wouldn't work if that wasn't true.
Yeah. Oliver, are there other questions, or can Oliver take it away?
I just have one other comment, Chris. Just like we had CSS with FileMaker and we weren't able to, really get our hands on it, kind of, so to speak, in the way that CSS behaves. I wonder, like it's a great point that you suggest that the community kind of dive in and look at these things that'll influence product engineering or engineering to look at the things that we find interesting and possibly useful. I wonder how much of this that, because we know what to do, we'll be able to actually do, like kind of get in there and Claris Studio behind the scenes and tweak or change.
Right. Well, there's the other aspect to this where it's not hard to make FileMaker talk to Mongo, sort of independent of Claris Studio. So I think we have the, if Claris Studio has, stated directions like these are the lines we're going to color in and we're not going to go outside of that, but FileMaker has the ability to do, talk straight to, a Mongo instance that we might want to do something, a low frequency use case for. And so they're like, that's not, a sort of big enough target for us to steer the product that way, but you do you. If we want to, optimize something for IoT devices. The other thing is that some of these things that Mongo's really good at, like IoT or time-based data or log stuff, is stuff we've never considered in the past because, I don't know, if you try and ingest a 1 gigabyte log file, it takes a while in FileMaker, especially if you want to search it and you start cranking on the indexes. So Mongo is good at some things that FileMaker's not good at all at. And so for us to start exploring, this will be new terrain for a lot of us if we, have generally had our focus in FileMaker. So to be able to build a security incident response manager in a Mongo FileMaker hybrid system, something I would have never considered before this. But, that's like a genuine possibility now. You might want to create something that monitors your whole network. You could do it.
There are a few other questions in the chat there.
Go ahead. We've got plenty of time.
Let's see. Stephen asking, so searching is faster if you're looking for address 2 and 80% of it doesn't have address 2.
I mean, this whole Swiss cheese problem goes away. But again, I don't want to step on Oliver's stuff because he starts to get into, how do you organize collections and, how would you search across them or aggregate them?
Other questions about like contrasting it to FileMaker, like for instance, FileMaker has stored calculations. Does Mongo have things like that too, or?
No, you don't have calculations, but you can certainly post totals or something like that. So if you stored a bunch of invoices or orders or something like that, there's nothing stopping you from, having a subtotal field if you want. But aggregating like across all invoices, like how much, how many dollars do I have past due for this given client? That's again getting into Oliver's stuff where he talks about aggregation across records.
Okay. And then last question was from Tom. Uh, is about your, I think about the SQL issue that you were having. I think when it wasn't unique, maybe. So what was it, a SQL issue with the ID prefaced by an underscore?
It did have an underscore in front of it. I've also tried it with the restaurant ID, I think, and that I believe was unique. And I had a problem with that. So there's something else going on that I'm still trying to work out. But I mean, it's early going here. I'll have it perfected.
Please alert the
Soon.
media
I'll
when
be
you
happy
get
to
that
share my findings when I figure it out.
Yeah, please do, because I think that'll be a big step.
So if there are no other questions, then I don't want to take any more time away from Oliver.
Okay, so if I click share, does that share my screen?
It'll ask you which monitor you want, but yes, that will do it.
Okay, I'm just going to do I'll just do the whole screen and move stuff around. Let me get things. Okay, now I need to see what I want you to. Oh, I have to just bring the app to the front, right? Okay. So you should be able to see. Let me just zoom out a bit. Okay. A couple of months ago, I suggested to the Connecticut developers group that we get someone to talk about MongoDB because it was a hot topic and you have to be careful what you wish for because nobody stepped up. So I ended up going onto Upwork and finding somebody who knew about it and reading a few little books and some reading and researched some material I put together for that group. I must warn everybody, I don't know much about MongoDB beyond sort of almost what is just written on these slides. And I may use the wrong vocabulary for some things or be just wrong. So, but I did spend the time. So here we go. I'm going to pick up a little way through. I was talking about sharding. I'm going to talk about relational data models in the sense that we're very used to FileMaker and normalized databases, and also the case in FileMaker where you have to denormalize to get it to work fast enough. But we're used to one and one many relationships, many one and many relationships. And so I was trying to answer the question, if I've got something I'm used to doing the FileMaker way or a normalized data structure way, and I just throw up tables as I need them, how am I going to take advantage of Mongo and how should I look at sort of migrating from one to the other or doing a hybrid solution? So I'm going to talk a little about relational data models and how, first of all, how one-to-one many relationships can work in Mongo, and then talk about how they can use many one and many relationships using what they call references. And then this is a managed denormalization using tools that Mongo provides that let you get the best of both worlds, a hierarchical data structure, but still avoid, still manage the data integrity that comes from what normally we handle just by normalizing completely with tables. If I haven't explained anything clearly enough, by all means, just ask me to go over something again or interrupt. So a one-one-many relationship, the JSON structure of documents allow hierarchical structures to be managed easily. That's putting it mildly. Related documents or arrays of documents can be simply embedded in a parent document. And of course, with one-one or one-many, there's only one parent. So here we've got a user with a username, a JSON subobject, which provides contact information, another one that describes the user access level with a number and with a string. And that's very simple, but it's typical sort of JSON object that you might store as a single document in a collection. If you have many one or many relationships, you can insert an object ID here that references another collection. So it works like two key fields in a SQL or a relational database. basically, and it looks up. So it's equivalent to a left outer join in SQL, and lets you this behave as if this data, this sub-object was embedded in this one. And as I talked to the expert I was talking about, he said, if you do this and sort of build a relational database using this, it won't be as fast as Oracle. But then from the FileMaker point of view, are we as fast as Oracle is not a question that gets asked very often, because the answer is no. And so it might be a lot faster than FileMaker, nevertheless, currently, as Draco is at this moment. But if you were going to totally build a relational normalized system using these references between collections, and that's the way you're going to do it, probably you're better off using a traditional RDMM, MySQL or Oracle. I can't say RDMM, whatever, I can't say it. I'm garbling it. So, but you could. So you could create a join document like that using these references, and you can emulate complex normal form data models in MongoDB. And while that's true, you can do what Mongo people call modernizing it, using denormalization to improve read performance significantly. So let's look at, here's an example of a very simple database of people: name, gender, age, address. But let's suppose, for example, that address is not a personal address unique to that person. It's an office building in which 200 people work, and everybody in that business moves to a new building. And so everybody's address changes. Or the zip code for New York City changes, unlikely, but maybe or something changes, where you normally, with normalized tables, you wouldn't worry about it. It'll just correct itself automatically. So managed denormalization means that you're going to manage the data integrity, where this hierarchical data contains some redundancies, automatically. And the MongoDB database itself does not have any built-in tools to do this, so it has to be coded. But Mongo does provide tools to do this with a database hosting environment called Atlas. And there's a slide about MongoDB Realm, which is a service you can use with Atlas, and a later slide, which I will get to. Now, we talked about aggregations. There are things called there's something called an aggregation pipeline, which lets you filter collections, summarize values, sort the result, and it can output that to another collection, or can be used to update documents in an existing collection. So yes, can I do a calculation and an update with a summary? Can I put in an invoice total? I can use this to put the total of every invoice if I want. And I won't go into it, but you can dig in and find out how these work. It's kind of like a query, basically, or possibly, but aggregations, let me just go back to here. A pipeline can be used for any kind of data transformation. And despite its name, you don't have to aggregate things. You can do other kinds of calculations. So there was a question about stored calculations. I don't believe you can literally create a stored calculation right in the definition of a document, but you can use these pipelines and use these routines to maintain in real time subtotals or aggregates or calculations or reference data from other collections and so on. And they have things called a view. A view is the end result of an aggregation pipeline, and it behaves like a connection, just like a view in SQL would. It would behave like a table, but like a SQL view, it's not indexable. I mean, some SQL views can make use of index fields, but a view in Mongo is not indexable. And if you query a view, I mean, pretend it's a collection and then ask questions of it, it basically has to run the pipeline and then tack on the query you've on at the end of the pipeline definition. So it's not particularly fast, but for certain situations where you don't necessarily need speed, you just need to be able to get, on low frequency, certain things collected and made use of. They might well serve the purpose. So I want to talk about a case study of a client of mine where there's a very complex structure. And it's a small company. It's the kind of small company that's been a sweet spot for FileMaker. They have about 15 employees. It's the kind of client I've done a lot of work with, and FileMaker has enabled me to provide value to them at a cost that they could not possibly afford with other platforms. So, you know, and I made my living for 20 years working for people like this. So I don't want to sort of put down Draco too much, but here's something that Draco doesn't do very well. They're allowed a lot of special treatment. There are 55,000 pieces of equipment located in 2,000 facilities. These are mostly in New England, some in New York State. Each equipment item has 2 to 10 measurements that need to be done annually, and the list of measurements and the pass criteria for them depends on the equipment type. They have 700 equipment types, each with its own list of required measurements and its own pass criteria for those measurements. Each facility might have up to 300 equipment items, and a visit is set up for a specific date or a due date for the facility. And a technician goes out there and measures every piece of equipment over a couple of days, or if it's a smaller place, a few hours, and enters the measurements in FileMaker Go on an iPad, or I've used also WebDirect on an iPad for that. And they update everything, it gets put in the database. Back in the office, inspection certificates get printed out. The states require annual inspection for all these pieces of equipment, from a microscope to a blood analyzer to a centrifuge, all kinds of stuff. So a visit is a group of inspections. An inspection is the set of measurement results for one piece of equipment. So, you know, each visit's a group of inspections. A measurement is complete if all the tests have been done and the results meet the pass criteria. An inspection is complete if all the measurements are complete, and a visit is complete if all the inspections are complete. So to ask the question like this, are there any visits whose due date has passed but they aren't complete, given the size of the, you know, the data structure we have here, is something that Draco just basically doesn't do very well at all, because you're trying to drill down through 3 or 4 levels of hierarchy of data and ask questions, aggregate answers, aggregate up, and then search on the aggregated results to find a yes or no question. The only way I managed to make this work is by a lot of denormalization. So when a measurement is finished, it gets marked as complete. As soon as you've done all the measurements for one inspection, that inspection is marked as complete, and so on. Then you have to go back and find you've done something wrong. You have to unmark them again, start all over again. I nearly lost this client because FileMaker was so slow at some of this. But by doing the denormalization, a lot of PSOS scripts, and also giving them access through Microsoft Remote Desktop, it speeds things up a lot. I've kept them happy. But a developer of table-driven applications would not hesitate to implement a schema like this. I've used the FileMaker TOG, but obviously there's loops in here, so I put things on top of each other. So I've got a location, that's a site, it belongs to a customer. Most customers have multiple sites. They have visits, the location has equipment. The equipment has a type. Each type has a test profile, which is a list of measurements, which are in a table called measurement types, and the criteria for a particular equipment type are stored in the test profile. So as you go through, it's got to keep looking all this stuff up as you go through it. And then you want to do lots of searches, ask questions on aggregated levels of data. If I could simply take the visit, the inspection, the measurements, just those things, and create them in a indexable BSON, whatever you call it, put it in a MongoDB document, I wouldn't have to chain through all these tables to ask the questions. It would all be in one place. And I could find a way to even if I had to do a calculation on the fly to check each one, I would only have, there's 3 or 4 visits a week, or sorry, 3 or 4 visits a day. I would check the last month. It would go through it pretty fast and answer the question, are there any that haven't been done that should have been? So if I look at this section, here's those 4 tables are completely hierarchy. They're one many, one many, one many. So all of this could be, everything for one location could be one document. I have to look up some other stuff and I have to figure out a way to do that from these reference tables and so on. But my question is, if I'm used to using FileMaker, how do we go about taking advantage of MongoDB? And I was thrilled when they first introduced this, and somebody at FileMaker, who may, I suspect, live to regret saying it, says you can just press a button and it will all go into Mongo. I don't know I hope that's true, but I'm not holding out a lot. Well, we'll see. Or I could just take the visits. So each visit would be one object. If that was an indexable decent object, I could search very, very fast. As Chris mentioned, it is really quick to search these. This would make this thing fly. I'm just going to go back and cover a little bit of vocabulary here. Mongo, well, I think Chris mentioned it. It's a cloud database service. It simplifies deploying and managing MongoDB databases while offering the versatility you need, it's not my words, the Mongos, to build resilient and performant global applications. And you can get it on AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud, probably some other places by now. MongoDB Realm provides a service interface for Atlas that allows secure querying. It runs aggregation pipelines, and it has Realm triggers that allow you to execute application and database logic automatically, either in response to events or based on a predefined schedule. It's kind of like a server-side script running through all that stuff, updating aggregates for you, for example. It's probably a lot more sophisticated than I imagine. And Realm has something called a change stream. It can listen for changes in the data that you ask it to, and automatically broadcast in only client applications that are watching documents in the collection at the time of the event. And I believe it can then set one of these triggers off, run aggregation pipelines. So if you wanted a stored calculation, you could create one, as I understand it, using Realm triggers that would basically, as soon as one of the values in the document changes that would result in the change in the stored calculation, it will set off a trigger, it will run this, and it'll update that object. That's the way I understand it. I'm wanting to be corrected. There are a few little links here. This is an interesting little book. You can get it on Apple Books or Kindle. Takes about a couple of hours to read. Actually, it gives you a lot of information. A little basic, but it's a good starting point. There's some other things here. Mongo Basic DB Basics Guide and so on. So I don't know if there are going to be new questions. I'm happy to do my best to answer them if there are. And that's it from me.
Well, thank you, Oliver.
Fantastic
questions?
presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to just, how do I get back to my? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Go ahead if anybody has any questions.
What would be a common interface type application that would be used with Mongo right now if you wanted to do build an interface to it? What would is there anything typical?
I don't know enough to answer that question. Maybe Chris could. Obviously, Claris Studios.
And we are all looking forward to that.
Yeah. I would love it if Claris Studio lets you work with multiple collections in the same app. I don't know if you can make a workflow that goes into more than one collection. I couldn't quite figure that out.
Studio right now is for data collection, but
Yeah,
Claris Pro will be able to read the Mongo that is saved from the studio.
yeah. But each studio app is just going to be one collection, right, to start with?
I believe so.
Yeah, I mean, if
I
you
have a
could,
use case. If somebody wants to hear about it.
sure.
Okay. I didn't hear anybody say yes. Sorry. I have a client that I built a FileMaker app for, and one of the employees really loves MongoDB, and so he actually does a data API dump of the data into MongoDB, and then he runs his website with MongoDB. So I would think the ESS would be ideal for that, and he wouldn't have to, he'd save a whole step just getting his data straight into MongoDB using Oliver's and Chris's setup. So anyway,
Yeah, if ESS can work both ways, two directions, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, currently it's just read only, but it's,
sorry.
I don't know if it's going to be the next iteration or the one after that, but it's clearly in the roadmap for them to have it be a two-way street. By the way, I pasted a bunch of links into the chat regarding the earlier question about containers. There's some Docker resources I put in there, so it definitely runs on Docker.
See if I can.
There's a link in there about aggregation pipelines for people who are interested in doing, not just queries, but updates across multiple, you could do not just documents, but collections. And I also have a link there to Mongo University, which has just tons and tons of, they're kind of basic, but they're free classes. You can get certificates in them and stuff like that. And it's all, it's a really nice setup there for MongoDB. So if you are interested in anything in particular, like containerization, there's a track that would, walk you right through it. So it's pretty awesome.
Great.
Oh, and whoever asked the question about what do you use this thing for? Who's using Mongo? I pasted a link at the very last item in the chat. It's like who's using Mongo? So it's like Forbes, Toyota, Humana Healthcare Systems, Shopline and e-commerce systems. So, people with big, high volume web presences are using this. But I think Toyota's using it for a bunch of stuff. Yeah, they're using it in factory floor automation. Jonathan asked to see the list of books again. Did you get to see that?
Oliver, are you going to post your
Yeah,
slides?
let me share.
Thanks.
I'm going to post the slides. Yes, I'll reply to the announcement. Yeah, I'll get it out there.
Thanks.
Maybe just copy the list of books from your PDF and just paste it in the comments there for people.
Yeah, hang on a second. Yeah, let's do that.
And Chris and Oliver, question. How do I say this? If it's so great, the bridging this world for now is going to be very interesting because it's going to give us possibilities, like you said, like anonymous users and access to the scale and all that. But do you see the eventuality that I don't know, Draco goes away completely and we're in a Mongo world, a FileMaker Mongo world? It's just the back end is just Mongo and it's all just kind of transitioned that way. Is that something that you can think will happen? I mean, is there still relevant, like with all these cool features, is there still relevancy for Draco and the SQL kind of
Yeah, that's
store?
the question, isn't it? You know, I certainly don't feel like I'm in a position to give a good answer to that. Maybe someday.
Mhm.
I also think calling Draco a SQL database a little unfair to SQL. Um, the record structure of Draco is very inefficient for use over a wide area network. It's okay if you're you're dealing in one table only, and as soon as you try to sort of create an aggregated calculation, an aggregation function over another table, and then sort found set by the results of that, because everybody knows this. The things you just can't do very well. I don't think it was originally designed for as a wide area network data tool. But nevertheless, I don't want to badmouth it. I've made a living out of it for 20 years, and I've given great value to some small business clients that, FileMaker is about the only product that have given them that.
So do you think that like Solar or Elasticsearch will be essential to this or tangential? Because I know that's a lot of the impetus now is searching, not doing finds, but doing searching, relevant searching.
Not my, I don't know enough to answer that question, I don't think.
That's the
Other-
next presentation. Stephen's going to report back and tell us all about it.
Bite your tongue.
No, I
Another
mean,
question-
it's a button, everything moves to Mongo, so the answer is obviously yes, we're going to, everything going to be in Mongo.
Yeah, another question I had was, we didn't talk much about this, but what are the UX considerations? Like if you're in a Mongo world, I mean, I know that one of our developers brought up this idea of asymmetric design, which kind of makes me think that like if you're looking like the typical FileMaker view is, let's say you have a portal, and the portal itself has got a fixed number of rows, and it sounds like in the Mongo document, those rows are dynamic, right? So like it's asymmetric. So like you're looking at a layout and you're looking at a list of people. Some people have 3 contacts methods and some have 1 or 2. It just dynamically addresses that. So I guess it lends itself well to web design such that it does that asymmetric part of it. But is any resources that you can talk about when it comes to UI? I mean, and this is all kind of like at least from the Mongo side, it's all back end stuff, right? It's just like SQL, right? There's no front end, just like FileMaker is unique in that space.
Yeah, that's it exactly. Mongo is strictly a back end, and any sort of true application interface would be built in some other tool.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys know who Brendan McCarthy is? He was a Claris engineer back in the 90s. And when the next computer came out, he actually re-back-ended FileMaker with, he could swap in any back-end he wanted. And what he cooked up was too disruptive to the licensing model at the time, but Vince,
Was this around the time FileMaker 7 came out?
this was probably around FileMaker 3 or 4, somewhere in there, maybe even 5. But yeah, he actually did that experiment. He built it, and people freaked out and spiked it into the ground immediately. But Vince, the future that you were talking about, where maybe Draco completely goes away and FileMaker becomes almost a pure IDE that can talk to any backend, has been built. And it was not well received at the time, but it's certainly possible.
I kind of think when FileMaker 7 came out, if they'd used a SQL backend for that, that would have been a great idea. It probably didn't seem like it at the time. I don't know if you remember FileMaker 7, but it was Chris Moyer and I do.
It's funny to mention. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I lived through the FileMaker 6 to FileMaker 7 process. I hope this is going to be as easier than that.
Yeah, we shall see. I mean, it's baby steps right now, and so I think that's their way of addressing that kind of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be interesting living in both worlds for a while. That's for sure.
Yes.
When you mentioned Brendan McCarthy, it's interesting. It rings a bell because when I first moved to the Bay Area, when I lived there, I met someone who did work at FileMaker at the time, David Alter, and he told me something about what you just said about this thing that they were suggesting. Oh, you can put any backend, you know? I think David Alter was one of the engineers that was actually kind of like working with Claris at the time. Anyway, I'm curious to ask him now.
Well, fourth dimension would let you put it in front of Oracle or whatever, or MySQL, anything like that. And that was a competitor at the time. I don't know what's happened to it these days.
If I could throw something out for a second, it's Mike Ross here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was thinking what would be very ideal if there was a new field type that was basically a document, and that document model, the Mongo model in there, could be parsed out by FileMaker right on the layout, on the fly, just by the structure that you see, which would eliminate having to create subtables for things like phone numbers and addresses and things of that nature.
I suggested on the ETS board that we should have a base on, how do you say it? Bison, boson? I don't know. A boson
object. Yeah.
Yeah, we should have a base on field type for FileMaker and analogs of all the JSON functions, but actually worked with the binary version, and it would enable you to start creating documents and right inside FileMaker without ready to start moving them to Mongo later.
Exactly.
And I think it'd be a great idea if anybody out there from Claris is still on. That's a great idea.
I noticed when JSON came out, there was some people experimenting with, creating these flexible document descriptions of the record, like so that, like bypassing the fields in the table and storing like a JSON object inside a field to represent, like, I don't know, I guess that I don't know how to refer to it in the right way, document or collection or whatnot, but I guess what Bison format is, because it's a binary format, is so much more efficient than storing that whole text blob in a FileMaker container.
It has its indexing system to help you find things as well. You need to have that, yeah, as well.
And Mongo has the way to translate that to feed the JSON and back, which we'd have to have within, if that was a container in FileMaker, we'd have to have that ability to work with it, to translate it from the binary to data that we could actually use.
I mean, then, like, to Oliver's example before, where he was showing his graph, would that be like something that you would pick like a node and say, this is my collection, and then all the relationships would end up becoming sucked into that black hole and turn into like a document based on that collection?
Yeah.
I'm trying to visual. Yeah.
Yeah, everything in that chain of hierarchical tables would be a collection, and everything, each hierarchy would be one document.
Okay, I'm writing my email to Clay right now.
Mongo's really fast at ingesting JSON and CSV files. It just rips them. I pasted the Twitter thread that Brendan had posted about that whole incident with re-backending FileMaker. So the first link is the beginning of the thread, and then the second link is the specific thing where he said, I hacked it to do this.
Okay, maybe Rosemary could answer this. What can we say about MongoDB and what's going on to people who aren't FileMaker partners and aren't involved in this discussion? Is it still involved?
It's pretty much all public. I mean, we raised it in public webinars back in August and again last month.
Nothing. Okay, good, because that's good, useful to know. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
And I think Chris's point was that we're delving into this so that we understand it. It isn't necessary for us to learn it. If we do pick up, the new Claris products and we have a MongoDB, it's not going to be necessary for us to actually learn MongoDB. It's going to be done for us. We don't need to do that import that Chris did. It's going to be available.
Good. Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, and I would add the other thing that Pete has emphasized is that part of the benefit of this for Claris and for developers and partners is that with the new ESS Plus or new ESS, whatever, I can't remember what we're calling it, because Claris owns both sides of the pipe, we can do a lot more optimization to take advantage of the strengths of both Mongo and FileMaker.
Exactly. And that's the whole thing, is that we're just learning it because we want to know about it and we want to understand it and we want to feel comfortable about the security models and everything else about MongoDB, and say, if our clients say, well, what's this MongoDB? Then you can say, it's okay. And it's going to be easy for us. We're not going to have to know how to actually program a MongoDB, but we can feel comfortable about it.
Chris, you had a slide about the encryption thing again. Can you just reiterate how that, what possibilities? Yeah.
Let's see. So there were a couple of things. So there was, encryption in transit, encryption at rest, and then the client side field level encryption. Is that the one you're referring to?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me pull that up.
So I guess my question would be, what do we have extra in here that would, like, I mean, we have encryption at rest in FileMaker. We have what else? Like, what's different?
So this one is hugely different just because it's client controlled encryption, and then what ends up in the database cannot be opened by anybody but that client.
Oh, I see.
The MongoDB driver in the middle there resides on the client machine.
So meaning that, like is it the whole document that's encrypted, or like at a field by field
Well, in this
level?
case, they're just encrypting, specific fields, the social security number,
I see.
email, and mobile.
Okay.
And so, it's very similar to field level encryption that we had in FileMaker, except generally a developer or the DBA could probably decrypt that stuff with whatever logic we built into the system. And that's not true here. This is completely user controlled.
So if a user puts in a record that's got encryption, then it's only that user that can pull that record out. Because if it's encrypted, then it's only, okay.
So now these are very specific fields that they want to keep secret. The indexed ID field, the first name, last name, all that stuff is available and searchable and could be grabbed by a reporting engine. But the stuff that is private information, say patient data or something like that, can be encrypted and only viewed by the creator.
And what if you wanted to encrypt it such that only a group of people could see it? How would that be different?
That is a great question, and I don't know the answer to that, but I could probably find out.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Well, that's a huge question because that's a common use case where you got a person who leaves the business and they're no longer available. How do you access that data? This would be a serious problem for so many businesses.
Or you have a black project of some kind where only certain people are disclosed, right? So all kinds of use cases.
I can't imagine that somebody else hasn't thought of that.
Yeah, of course. I'm sure there's something about it, but yeah. I mean, for me, it's been a huge eye opener. I will share a story from way back in the days of FileMaker 2. And I was in Montreal and I was learning FileMaker, and there was this new thing, this FileMaker 3 semi-relational, and I went to a class in upstate New York. I was Rich Colombre gave a class. I think it was Eric Culver and Rich Colombre, and it was just starting to understand relationships or relational model, and I felt like, oh, I need to understand this, and it really launched my whole direction of kind of really being able to work with the tool and understand what's going on. And so I really appreciate both these presentations today to help us kind of start dipping our toes into this new world and these learning resources to better understand this stuff. Thank you so much.
All right. If there are no other questions, I guess that's it, eh?
I think so, Eric. What do you think? What do you say?
Well, that looks pretty good. I guess I don't know if people want to hang out for a few minutes and talk about anything else, or continue to talk about MongoDB.
There was one thing I wanted to do, but I felt like it was a little bit too kind of rude to the presenters, and I wanted to ask where everybody's from, because Janine said it's kind of cool to see where people are from. But I know Darren is in Australia. I'm in Germany. Koji's in Japan. It's cool to see such an international presence. London, Ontario, San Jose, California, Quebec.
I'm in the holler.
You're in the what?
Holler. It's a Kentucky
term
for the bottom of the hill where the water all runs. They call it a holler or a hollow.
Oh, wow. São Paulo, Brazil. Wow, cool. Yeah, that's really neat.
Should have done that at the beginning.
I know. I wish there was a feature in WebEx where you could state like maybe just your country, not necessarily your city, but anyway, the city if you want. and it would be a little map, and you could see where everybody's from. That would be really cool. That would be really neat. Cool.
I just noticed a question in the Q&A from Ken about, is the Draco engine being retired? And I think the answer to that is not at this time. FileMaker will continue as FileMaker, well, under its new name eventually. But I think the vision is that we will have FileMaker continue, and if you want to move to the new Claris Studio engine, eventually you can, but you do not. We're not going to force anybody to do it.
Yeah, I guess the probably the less obvious question would be, could Draco ever be retired? Like, I mean, are there things that Draco does that Mongo will never be able to do?
Yeah, I mean, right now it's just a simple form, right? It's got nothing necessarily like I'm filling out a form and I'm giving you all my contact numbers, you know, like I'm building like a document about one person has 3 contacts and one person has 1. But yeah, interesting to see where that will go with Claris Engineering and how it'll evolve.
But because I think I remember one of the under the hood sessions I saw was like one of the big deals with Draco was the ability to do concurrency, where, you know, when you're making changes, it's able to distribute those updates to everybody. But yeah, I can't remember what the significance. I mean, I know what the significance is in use, but I'm what the significance is in the Draco model that makes that possible there, and maybe not as easy to do in SQL systems.
Actually, I had the question I did post in the thread earlier on, and that is Mongo is eventual integrity. And with FileMaker, we have transactional integrity, meaning like, let's say you have, I don't know what the right term is, but these replications or shards, or I don't know, like it's lateral, right? So if I put in something here, it replicates it, right? So, and someone else is looking at something, they're looking at that replica because it's closer to them or whatever. But so like if I put it in here, and it eventually shows up there, like, I mean, are there situations where Mongo might not be well suited, like, you know, obviously banking transactions or things like that, where you don't want, like, you know, the fact that it hasn't updated somewhere else, and you know what I'm saying?
I think MongoDB has the ability to do transactions, but it's
it does
not as powerful as a SQL database. So when you do a transaction in Mongo, first of all, you can't be using sharding, I think, unless that something's changed recently. But I believe it will copy to all of your replicas before the transaction completes. Otherwise, it's, you know, standard ACID transaction. But if you're doing a banking system or an accounting system, I think that's the most obvious case of a system that is really not suited for Mongo at all, because that's not what it's best at. It's sort of a hack.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Jason. And thanks very much for bringing it up, Vince.
Hey, I got a technical comment here. This WebEx software does a very impressive job of real-time transcribing. I wonder, is that something that people use? I think the presenter should be given a copy.
Oh yeah, I think they did give me a transcript at the end. Sometimes I post that just I don't actually end up using, because YouTube kind of does its own transcription, which maybe is just as good. I don't know.
It
But,
looks, I mean, I've seen years gone by, I've seen YouTube translations, and this looks way superior. And I just in terms of, putting all this excellent content out there, which is being recorded anyhow, having it available in a text discoverable format that's visible to search engines and whatnot,
yeah,
might
yeah,
be
sometimes
something.
Steve provides those for me.
Is there a way to teach it how to transcribe better? Because Claris becomes Clarence, and JSON becomes J-son.
Oh,
And
it definitely needs some cleanup.
few
Unless
other,
Claris is doing a
few
rebranding,
other
maybe there's a
really
rebranding in the works.
strange translation.
But
Need to
Beverly,
learn
your
our technique.
assignment is to take it all and clean it all up and make me sound good. I wanted to make a comment about replica sets. I was told by the guy I talked to that a typical setup might be to have 2 write copies and 1 read copy. So the read copies always can go at full speed, and the writing and stuff, but the stuff is written to the writable copies, and it updates the read copy pretty quickly, but not instantly, I guess.
Yeah.
So there are obviously various solutions or structures that could be used. That was one of them suggested to me.
Does Mongo handle that automatically, or like if you tell it to do that, or is it you have to build your structure?
I'm not sure. I take it it's a common structure, and the tools to build it to make it work that way are probably around. I don't know how hard they'd be to use or how big a task it would be.
There's a configuration file that you can do. I'm trying to find a. So that's not a default configuration, but it's. I'm trying to find the custom replication. There's more information here. I'm going to paste it into the chat. But there was a page I was specifically looking for that sort of gets into the whys and the wherefores. Like you have complete, if you're on the paid service, you have complete control on how a cluster is configured. So the short answer, I guess, is yes, but it's not automatic. You would have to tell it to do that.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Now I see what Tony was talking about. I couldn't see the transcript before.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Not perfect, but it looks up in the high 90s. And I think consuming content by reading it, I think is faster, and it's also searchable. Because you can jump around, you can search
Right.
for a word, and so forth and so on.
But you can't download it if you don't turn it on at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, it would have to be a decision. It would have to be green lighted by the presenters, obviously, and by all the various parties, I guess.
Yeah, it doesn't let me copy or download it either as a guest.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. It looks like it's not scrapable, which is kind of weird. I would have thought that the owners of the WebEx software would have the ability to gain access to that. I mean, there's a lot of stuff for us to be learning here. Anything that makes it easier to absorb all this content.
Well, when I get a copy of the recording, I'll take that and just post that raw into the community, and that way, somebody wants to mess with it. Okay. I don't know if anybody wants to clean it up or just use
Well,
it.
yeah, collaborative editing. I'll take out the I just said I'll edit that out.
So I just pasted a link into how to do custom cluster configuration.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
There's just a lot to learn. This is, to a large extent, a foreign landscape.
And I remember I was in another meeting, and one of the questions came up was whether or not the MongoDB would be something that's only out in the cloud or something you could do on premise with this.
You can absolutely set it up on premise. But the great thing about Atlas is it does all this sort of cluster infrastructure for you. You could roll your own on-premise configuration, but it's a manual process as opposed to this sort of almost automated provisioning.
So does somebody own MongoDB?
So yeah, MongoDB is a company and there's a community version of it, but it's also, a commercial concern. So you can buy enterprise or pro versions of the thing and pay for hosting or what have you. You can also, they've created this Atlas service, which you can get from them, but you can also get it from other cloud providers. You can get it from Google, you can get it from Microsoft, you can get it from AWS. So Atlas is available on sort of the cloud provider of your choice. Rosemary, do you know what your situation is with Atlas? And I assume it's, running under Apple's auspices.
I have no idea. This is since I've left sales, I know Andrew always used to say that, the further he got away from direct customer interactions, the dumber he got. And I am definitely in the same boat these days.
Yeah, I had a manager who told me never to get into management if I liked programming.
Exactly. Yeah, I know I've driven by Mongo's headquarters in Mountain View or Palo Alto. I can't remember exactly where it is, but
I think it's Palo Alto.
I know I've seen that building.
Didn't Apple bought a database company, maybe 6 years ago, 7 years ago, called Revelations DB. That was a NoSQL DB.
I think
And
it was Foundation.
Foundation. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Was that a NoSQL engine? Is it kind of similar to Mongo?
Pretty sure it was.
Hmm.
And I thought, oh, great, now something's going to happen with FileMaker and Foundation,
Yeah.
but, not quite.
Yeah, not quite. Anyway, interesting.
The trick is betting on the right technology, huh?
I'm going to sign off, everyone. Rosemary, thank you for recording and hosting for us. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Oliver. And have a great day wherever you guys are. Ciao.
Oh yeah, our sun's still up over here.
Certainly isn't here in the Northeast.
Good to see you, Vince.
See you.
Thank you, everyone.